Up next on Inside Vintage Racing, the premiere episode. Welcome to Inside Vintage Racing. I'm Brian Belansky. This is Season 1, Episode number 1. For those of you familiar with the other Inside shows on this channel, Inside the SCCA, Inside Champ Car, we are expanding the Racing Network and the RacingWire Podcast Network. We're going to be adding some new shows. We've had such great response and great success with the first two shows that are Inside the SCCA and Inside Champ Car. We decided it's time to break out and do some new stuff. So the next show we're starting, Inside Vintage Racing, also coming along, will be some version of Inside Sports Car Racing, focusing on IMSA and World Endurance Racing and that type of stuff. That will premiere here in the next couple of weeks, maybe in August, once we get all of the details worked on that. But we're going to be expanding. At the end, we're hoping to get about 10 different podcasts here on the network on varying series. And if you'd like your series to be featured, you know how to find me. All that information is all over my podcast stuff. So without any further wait or delay, let's get right to our first guest here on Inside Vintage Racing. The guy in the window there, right next to me, his name is Ben Kuhl. And if he doesn't have a cool enough name, that's pretty awesome. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing mighty fine. How about yourself, Brian?
I'm doing great. Well, welcome to the first episode. Great to have you here. And you and I don't know if we actually met at the racetrack, but we've crossed paths either at the track or virtually. You are a mainstay here on the West Coast, one of the better, no question, photographers out there. That's how I started to get to know you, seeing your handiwork, and then but you also race vintage racing in a Formula Ford, correct?
I do. A 1972 Eldon Mark 10, the small but very passionate Eldon community.
I think you and I have a mutual friend too, Mr. Fanner.
We do, and he was kind of my first, and first of very few people who have the Eldon itch.
Yes. For those who don't know, Paul Fanner is the head of Racer Media and Racer Magazine, the inspiration behind Racer Magazine, an Eldon Formula Ford guy. If you ever want to get Paul revved up, ask him about his Eldon. So before we get to all of this, I asked the same question. If anybody's used to my other shows, they will know what question is coming. And every first-time guest on a podcast gets the question, and here it comes, directly to you. How did you get mixed up in this crazy sport that we love?
Man, so it's always been a family thing. My dad was an SCCA racer back in the Midwest. He grew up in Missouri. He started out Formula Ford, moved on to Formula Atlantic, with his high watermark, his fun moment being in the SCC runoff. So years before I was around. It would have been Mid-Ohio, I believe.
Okay.
So we've always been a kind of a racing family. My dad started, around my age. I've got an older brother who races Formula Ford as well. So we've just all kind of got the racing itch, and then photography was something I could do in between races to get myself to the track.
Right.
I just love being around it.
Yeah, definitely. So was Dad a Formula Ford driver also, or did he drive something else?
He started with a Lola Formula Ford that we actually just recently found his original car. It was in, after he'd had it and moved on from it, some collector in New Jersey had it in a big stable of cars, and we located it, and it still had some original paint on some bodywork from my dad and his dad, who had painted the numbers and done stuff by hand. So we've got that back, and we're about 60 to 70% of the way through a very significant restoration. on a Lola Formula Ford, so he'll be back with us as well.
Cool, cool. So will all three of you be racing?
Yep, we're gonna really confuse timing and scoring.
So what are the names? It's Ben and
We've got Ben Kuhl in the Eldon,
right.
Ethan Kuhl, my brother in a Lola T200, and then my dad in a Lola. Oh man, I think a 440. Paul Kuhl. So we're gonna
Okay.
have Paul, Ethan, and Ben all in Formula Ford.
Well, it may screw up timing and scoring, but it's really going to be hard for your announcers, and that's all I care about is how difficult it is. They're not all going to be the same color, right? Please tell me no.
No, we're not. That would be mean. But I'm sure we'll have some cases of wait, who's on third? You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Crazy, crazy. So when did you decide that you were going to try to go racing, though? I mean, that's a big step. These cars, they're not the most expensive cars in the world to run once you have them, but you're racing a car that's almost 50 years old, right?
Yeah. It is definitely not a snap, a snap decision. I growing up around it, my dad always had my brother and I out in the garage, just kind of learning and poking around and helping out. Um, Having taken part of a couple projects, we've got kind of multiple projects we've worked over the years. We kind of learned the mechanical ins and outs first, how to maintain. And after a couple of years of that, I got a lucky opportunity to travel with Steve Levinson and Tim Adcock of Team Perfect Pedal Racing, which was when the IMSA had a prototype challenge series with the Elon DPO2s, the open top, you know, subcategory to the LMP3 cars. And then that taught me how to maintain at a track, the standards of, hey, you don't have the money, you don't have other people to help you. How are you gonna make sure your car is fast, is safe, and is ready to go for the next session? So that kind of got me into the hey, prep your car, take pride. If you've got time to lean, you've got time to clean. It's got to be nut and bolt, just to really be thorough. And then just a couple of years after that, we found a Formula Ford project car that was just rough. That was the Eldon. It's always sold by someone who says it's race ready, which we then spent about 5 years tearing down to the bare frame and rebuilding back up. And it was just great to see the whole process of it. And by the time it's ready, hey, you've seen every part of the car, you've been involved with it, and you get to go racing. Doesn't get any better.
Yeah, yeah. So, why vintage? I mean, young guys, there's this perception, and I don't know that it's completely inaccurate, that vintage racing is a bunch of old guys going slow. So, you are not an old guy. So, why did you decide to go vintage racing?
And so I get it probably just relates to what I grew up watching Grand Prix in Le Mans.
Okay.
And just loved the cigar car shape of early formula. And the number on my car 4 was was due in part to Jackie Stewart in his BRM days. 4, loved it, loved just the look and the sound, and then getting to do it, getting to drive on groove tires, on tires with slip angle. It was just kind of this fun. I was just hooked. The uniqueness of driving a formula car, where I'm not a tall guy, and I am snug in this car. I can see my front wheels, so I can see exactly where I'm going. It's just you're so strapped into this thing. You're sitting on a gas tank, and you're in it. It's as pure and attached to the driving that I think you can get to.
So tell us a little bit about how did you do any like kart racing beforehand, or is going to Formula Ford and vintage racing your first step into this?
My dad was like, hey, if you guys want to try it, you can start out in vintage Ford, because that's what I did.
Okay.
Because he started out in Formula Ford. We had one day one day of a karting school as a Christmas present for my brother and I. That was one day of a 2-day program where we really just kind of drove go-karts around a parking lot of cones. Um, we got into a vintage racing school that Vara hosts. That's kind of where we started, and we just really took it slow.
Yeah, yeah. So for those folks who vintage race maybe in other parts of the country, or who maybe not don't vintage race at all, or just finding us for the first time, what is VARA?
Well, VARA is the Vintage Auto Racing Association, Southern California. It's been operating for 51 years. Last year was their 50 years of operating, racing out of primarily Willow Springs, um, occasionally Arizona, but it's very much a Southern California regional vintage racing organization.
Do you think it's a good place to kind of get your feet wet in racing? Because there's a lot of rules in vintage racing that are not in place in other forms of motorsports. And the first of which that comes to mind is, because some of these cars are pretty much irreplaceable, and the parts for them are, in many cases, you have to make them if you break them. There's kind of a fairly, not even a fairly, a very, very big no contact rule, right?
Yep, it is, and every vintage organization kind of has their own way of putting it. For Vara, it's the Vara bubble. It's, hey guys, this is a non-contact sport for the same exact reasons you mentioned. A lot of these cars are just over the years have just continued to go up in value. Cars back in the day, like your Spitfires and your Triumphs and your Mini Coopers and kind of your small bore production cars that would have been pretty common back in the day are now they're just worth more. And yeah, sourcing parts is difficult. But there's absolutely still a way to get in.
Right.
And Ovara, as well as some other groups, are expanding their years of eligibility in the different type of cars that they will include in run groups. And just, hey, if your car is safe, you're safe. You've really got a really cost effective place to go racing.
Right. What now? There is contact on occasion, and usually it's getting mixed up in someone else's moment.
Yep.
Case in point, there was an incident. It might have been 2 years ago now in a Formula Ford race, going into turn one at Willow Springs, and one car got messy, and then a couple of cars had to get messy to avoid it, and one of the cars didn't avoid it. So, but yeah, so there. It's not that nothing ever happens, but they try to avoid it as much as possible, right?
Yeah, and I remember that one very very well. I wasn't racing in that group, but I was taking pictures of it.
Right.
And I was across the track and just watched it. It is someone puts wheels off. No matter how safe you make it, hey, we're still racing.
Right.
So stuff is gonna happen. And yeah, and oftentimes it's, hey, someone puts two off and spins across the track, or someone has a mechanical and you're driving through a bed of oil. You can drive. You can be as safe of a driver. You
Right.
can do everything to make your car ready to run, but just you can't ever totally get rid of that. The variables of, hey, we're driving race cars.
And some folks drive their cars pretty darn hard, even though they're vintage cars, right?
They do. That's kind of one of the VAR, as well as other vintage groups, have kind of found a really good medium of, hey, we are driving history pieces. We're driving pieces of history that have been around for longer than their drivers, or longer. And it's great to see. Case in point, with Vara, there's a B sedan group that runs the Toyo Challenge 2.5 group. So you've got your 510s, your 2002s, your Alphas, and they really really race. They've got a couple shops that prep these cars, and drivers that will really drive them. They're very protective on their rules to make sure that, hey, because the competition's so high, they're keeping tabs on everything. But yeah, they really race.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. What give us a story. I mean, that's what we do here. We tell stories. What's been your kind of oh my gosh moment? Is it a particular event that you got to go to, or a particular track that you might have always dreamed to race on? Give us one of the highlights.
I've had my positive highlight was probably getting to race Laguna Seca. I was still pretty early on in my racing journey, and having been to Laguna Seca a couple times for the historics, having watched races there. We had participated. My dad had driven one of our cars there. It was very much on our bucket list of, hey, we got to get. And it was a SVRA event. Must have been 3 years ago or so. And it was just kind of an awe-inspiring moment of being on a track that is, so famous and so used, going down the corkscrew for the first time and my whole body clenching up and, just getting to experience the elevation change of that whole corkscrew in the rainy that just dumps you down the hill. It was just a joy to drive. It's so smooth, the curbs. It's perfect for a Formula Ford.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually showing right now some of the photos you've taken from Laguna, from the Monterey Historics. So people are getting a chance to see some of your handiwork behind the camera. And that is, there's some absolutely beautiful pictures. We're going to talk photography here in just a little bit. So, and by the way, the incident that I was talking about earlier that happened at Willow, that one of the drivers involved in that is going to be on as a podcast guest here, as a show guest here in the next couple of episodes. So, and we're not going to just talk about the wreck and everything that's happened since then, but we'll certainly talk about that. And she's a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to having her on here at some point in time soon. So, what have you and your dad and your brother, any of you all raced together yet, or is that a down the road kind of thing?
My brother and I often race together. We both run Vara. We're both in the vintage Ford category. In 74, maybe in 72. So we often race against each other, and we've lucky enough to have a couple races now where we've both finished on a podium. I'm not above, and I'm sure it'd come with a follow-on question that admit he's got me on speed a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, we get to race together, and it's fun. It's great to share it.
When are all three of you going to get to be out there?
Oh, probably not this year, but next year.
Okay.
All
right.
And knowing how my dad has been driving other various Formula cars in the meantime, and very well.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be trying to keep up with them.
Right. So who buys dinner? Is it the guy who won or the guy that lost?
Oh, I'm putting that on the winner. I know my strengths, and I know I'm a realist in this. So it's a winner gets to handle that.
Got it. All right, so let's switch gears here a little bit. And actually, you're kind of, before we get to the photography, you are, I don't know how your relation with VAR is, but you're one of the folks that helps run the club, right? A little bit?
Yeah, so at the start of this year, they asked me to join on their board of directors. So it's, I help them out with their communication, their media,
right.
And just, hey, whatever is needed to help an event go.
So I love the folks with VAR. I did some of your PA announcing back a couple years ago before I got too busy with other things, and really had fun with the crews that put your races on. Give your people how do folks find you? Are your races open to spectators? What's the way people find Vara if they're in California, in Southern California?
So yeah, if you're just a fan of vintage racing, or you're looking to get your feet wet and start, barracing.com, our website. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram. We've got two more races coming up this year. One end of September and one mid-November. We'll have the Oktoberfest All German event, B Sedan, end of the year Big Bore Bash, celebrating anniversary of Mustang. So we always have a big, Corvette versus Mustang show up there. If you're just looking to get started, the Vara has the University of Vara at the beginning of each year, which is a 2-day weekend-long driving school. As a mixture of on-track driving, classroom time. You get time with instructors. You get time on a skid pad, a slalom in the classroom to explain, to learn ins and outs of racing, car handling, car control, and then you get to go out and do it on the track for real. Yeah. You can do that in a race car, or if you're, looking to get into it, you can do it in a street car as well. Racing primarily at Willow Springs and Button Willow, but we're going to be expanding to some places next year. And we are pretty lenient, pretty open with years of cars. So if we can fit you in a class where you're going to be running close to time, where your car is safe, passes tech, you're all good to go. We can find a place for you.
Right now, I'm showing some shots of your cars at Willow Springs that you gave me to show. So, you know what? I love. We're gonna get to the photography stuff coming up now, but you've got some great stuff on track. But you have an eye for catching stuff on grid, on pit lane. That's really, really spectacular. And I'm a photographer myself. I've done a lot of shooting myself, and it is, there's a skill that it takes to be able to shoot fast cars going fast, no question. But to have the eye to do it in the paddock and get some of the creative shots that I see you have here is really kind of cool. Especially, I think I see a camera out the back of a pace car, by the way. I got to try that sometime, but that's a ton of fun. But yeah, so what people are seeing right now is they're seeing a lot of the different classes. This is the Big Bore GT class. I'm going to guess this is from last year's Big Bore race up at Willow Springs. And what was really cool when I was there for that is they do like a class picture. Is that the thing they do every year at the Big Bore? Because it's a lot of cars.
Yeah, we try and do that, and going forward, it's something that we want to keep doing each year, because it is. I think last year on the front row was two Corvettes. One of them, John Anderson's real true Greenwood, Star Spangled Banner Corvette.
Yeah.
And I remember that. I remember telling my wife, "Hey, I'm gonna go out and take a picture of the start of this race from the pace car," and getting a really bad look of, "Is that safe?" It's like, well, the pace car driver agreed to do it, and I remember wiggling myself out of this, not a convertible car.
Okay.
Going through turn 9 of Willow Springs and going, okay, if I wrap my legs around the seat and I kind of hold on to the car with one arm, I can try and get a picture. It's just a fun adventure of it. I probably won't be able to do those shots again, but I'm happy I got it.
Yeah, definitely. So how'd you get into the photography part of this?
It was, I remember a couple of years before my car was ready, my dad was racing with Vara. We have a March 81A Formula Atlantic that we ran with the Wings and Slicks group.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to get to the track. I needed a way to get to the track and have something to do.
Right.
Just to get me around it and to be at the track. It's, as you said, the Vara, the Vara group, the Vara family is such a good and fun just group of people. And I remember talking to Jeanette, the GM of Vara, and asking like, "Hey, is there any way I can help? Like, you guys, what can I help with? What can I do?" And she said, "Hey, we could really use some pictures." And I didn't have a very good camera, but I had a camera. And I just started going and
Yeah.
just taking pictures, and I didn't have any, picture taking experience before. So I just learned by taking a lot of bad photos and slowly taking better photos. And it's the danger of digital photography is you can take 6,000 photos and then go, oh no, I've got to look through
Uh-huh.
6,000 photos.
Uh-huh. So I started when it was not digital photography. So, and that was very, very expensive because I didn't know how to do anything, and so I would give myself 5 or 6 or maybe 10 rolls a weekend, and I can't tell you how many of those. If it's 10 rolls, 360 shots. If I got 25 good shots, that was a good weekend starting out. So as much as it sucks to have to go through 6,000 pictures, it helps with the learning curve, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's if I've had a couple. You stand and you take photos for an hour and you go back and you figure out you had a setting wrong and
Yep.
it's just totally overexposed, and it's like, well, just delete the file.
Yeah.
Just get away from it.
Yep. Yep. And it's hard because even with digital cameras, when you're out in the sunlight and you're looking at that little 3-inch screen at the back, sometimes you can't tell you've done it wrong, unless
Yeah.
it's really absurdly wrong with the exposure or whatever. It's really hard to see it, in the sunlight. So you have to go back and find out, and then and then there's the day when your card fails. Don't ask me about that day, So,
Yep.
but eventually it looks like you've upgraded your gear. So what?
Yeah, over time, slowly, just kind of figuring out. I've had a lot of really good advice from a lot of people who've done a lot longer than me.
Right.
With equipment. Started with a Nikon D3300, which I think I got from Target
Uh-huh.
in a bundle.
Yep.
And started with that and moved up to a better camera body and started getting, then you realize, oh, I've got a bigger camera body, so I need the battery grip, and
Yep.
I'm shooting a lot more pictures, so I need more cards, and oh, now look at this lens, and
Uh-huh.
I've just paced myself of, okay, let's only get what you need.
Exactly. But what you need, it
And
depends.
yeah, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. It's photography is a lot like race cars. You can spend as much money as you want, and it doesn't always end up with better results.
No.
What's
No.
your go-to setup now?
I've got a Nikon D750.
Okay.
And then for a lot of the paddock shots, which those are some of the ones I enjoy the most. The on-track stuff is the classic stuff, cars in motion, doing what they're supposed to do. But the pre-grid stuff is really just fun. And for that, I'm using a 70 to 200 lens, and then for the on-track, I've got a monster 2 to 500 telephoto lens. All Nikon. I'm a Nikon guy.
Right.
And I've got a couple. I've got a fixed 30 and a fixed 50 old vintage lenses that I found at a shop. I'll use those for pre-grid as well.
Yep.
And then I've started as well, just kind of for a bit of a hobby, is doing some film stuff.
Oh, cool.
So I've got a Nikon F4, D4 or F4 film camera.
Right.
I've got a shop near me that develops film. It's still very expensive, but it's fun. It's fun.
It's funny. I've switched. I was a Nikon guy, and I've migrated over to Sony mirrorless now. But I've been looking at eBay, and when I was a youngin, just starting as a photojournalist, everybody wanted to have. Obviously, at that time, it was basically Canon or Nikon, and if you were a Nikon guy, it was the F3.
Yeah.
The F3 HP high eye point or whatever it was, and
Yeah.
I'm looking at eBay right now, and I can buy that F3 for like $300,
Yeah.
And I am so tempted because I still have one nifty 50
Hmm.
50 millimeter lens that would fit on that, and it could be really fun to play with that a little bit. So, who knows? Yeah, or I could just
It's
spend more
fun.
money on
It's
cars.
fun.
So this though photography thing has opened some doors, right? You've I'm showing right now Long Beach Grand Prix pictures. So, do you ever think that you'd be shooting at the Long Beach Grand Prix?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I grew up going. My dad would take us. We have a bit of yeah. My dad started out when he moved to the West Coast. He was working for Swift when they were doing the Newman Haas Swift chassis, kart chassis. So we have memories. Old long time ago memories. Long Beach, getting pulled around in a red radio flyer wagon.
Huh.
Um, when you could still get the Friday practice tickets, go to a 7-Eleven, get a newspaper, get a deal for the free entry on Friday, and we'd, walk around and get pulled around the track, and then going on my own, and then yeah, getting the opportunity to take pictures at Long Beach has again has absolutely been something that I never really imagined would be a thing, and it's just been kind of a rock and roll tour of driving up there at absurd hours and sleeping very little and
Yeah.
just getting to enjoy it.
So I'm back on the Monterey Historics shots here. That's another great event that you've obviously been able to go and take photos at. What else have you done?
I've gotten to do some traveling to out to Arizona when Vara travels. I'll do the Monterey Historics. I think I've done that past 3 years now. I'll be going again this year. I got to do Long Beach this year and last year. And it's kind of just, hey, wherever I can get to. I am still with Monterey. I tent camp because it's the easiest way to get there and the cheapest way to get
Yep.
there. I just kind of I'm always just trying to take whatever opportunity I can get and just kind of, hey, see where it goes and enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. So what do you like shooting the most? Is there a particular group? Is there a particular? I mean, obviously you're a Formula Ford guy, so I'm guessing that might catch your eye and you might enjoy those. But we get to see so much in vintage racing, and I know what reminds me of when I go to a vintage race. I like the old GTP cars because that's what I saw when I first started, and those are starting to be eligible for vintage now. And back I'm looking at right now, I'm looking at the Haviland 83 car from that GTP era, which in my opinion is the golden era of sports car racing here in North America. Although we're in a really good moment now in sports car racing as well. But what's your favorite stuff to shoot?
With it, to try and pick something else because I'm a big fan of the GTPs as well, and it was the year prior where HSR kind of took over operations in Monterey, and they have a really big GTP
Right.
endurance field.
Yep.
They do the Daytona 24, and they always have a really good showing.
Right.
So they came over to Laguna and brought a lot of the really good GTP cars. I love those as well. To pick something else. Formula One or Formula 5000.
Yeah.
Both those groups ran last year. Um, being a Formula fan and seeing Formula Ones and hearing DFVs and the sparse Ferraris that are out there, I truly think it's one of the best sounding engines in the world as a DFV. Really, really going for it.
Yeah. I was along the wall this past year, I believe, at Long Beach when they had the Formula 5000 cars, and it's an amazement that anybody who was part of that era still can hear anything.
Yeah.
Because back in that day, nobody wore ear protection.
Yeah.
Even in the 90s, when I started wearing earplugs to flag, people looked at me like I was an idiot, And now when I talk to those people, they're like, "Huh? What'd you say?"
Huh?
But yeah, I mean, it's just those are the coolest sounding race cars, and when you get 5 or 10 of them coming right past you, it's like your chest beats with them as they come by. It's so cool.
Yeah, you feel it. It's awesome.
So do you sell any of your photography? Because I can imagine someone might find their favorite car here, and they might want that on their wall in their office or maybe out in their garage. If someone wants a great shot of their favorite car, do you sell your stuff?
I do. I've built my website. I've got all the photos I take at coolspeedphotography.com. I keep my prices as low as I can because I'm a racer as well, and being a racer, knowing a racer, and knowing our budget goes into the car. Prices are cheap. I've got all the digital downloads, photo prints, coffee mugs, pillows, phone cases, anything you could want.
Well, I may have to ask you about the my favorite car of all time is the Nissan GTP car.
Oh,
The 83 car, I believe, was the Jeff Brabham car. So if you have a shot of that, I may be ordering up one of those for the studio here.
I don't have a shot, but
Oh,
funny story how small of a world racing is.
okay.
That was that exact year car. My dad moved out from Missouri to California to work that program.
Really?
So he was an aerodynamicist for the Nissan program when it really got kicking, and those Nissan GTPs producing a lot of downforce.
Oh,
Those big tunnels.
And the sound they made when they let off the gas and that wastegate.
Gorgeous.
It's just it's a sound I'll never forget. So gonna have to have your dad on the show to talk about that experience of being back in the era. We did a show with Brian Redman on Inside the SCCA, which I will put a link into this podcast because I'm sure there are people who would be watching this who are vintage racing fans who would enjoy that podcast. It was a great hour plus of conversation with Brian. But getting some of the folks who were around and actually working on the cars or driving those cars from back in the day is something that we're going to do as much as possible here on Inside Vintage Racing. So stay tuned for more on that kind of stuff. But we'll talk and see if we can get your dad on the show.
Absolutely.
That would be cool. All right, so give us that website one more time before we let you go.
Yeah, that's going to be Cool Speed Photography. Last name is KUHL speedphotography.com. Everything's nice and reasonable price.
All right, and if you're driving, don't get into a wreck trying to jot that down. I will put the website, the link in the show notes, so you won't have to worry about that. You'll just click on the show notes, both on the audio podcast and on the YouTube channel. So just scroll down a little bit; it'll be right there for you, and all of that kind of stuff. And also, give us the link, the website one more time for Vara.
Just Vara Racing, VARA Racing.com. You can find all of our information, eligibility sheets, and next race information. Contact information is there if you want to reach out. If you've got questions about your car, eligibility, or what equipment you might need, we've got people specifically to help you out and get you going.
Cool. And if you'd like to be a guest on Inside Vintage Racing, or if you'd like to maybe suggest a topic or connect us with someone who would be cool to have as a guest, you can reach me at raceannouncerbrian@gmail.com, raceannouncerbrian@gmail.com. I'll also put that in the show notes. Don't get into a wreck, write it down. But we'd love to have your input on that. So, Ben, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out and being our first guest on episode number 1.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to see and hear everyone that comes next, and vintage racing, good stuff, fun stuff. I'm happy to be here, honored to be on the first show, and excited.
I appreciate it. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Inside Vintage Racing. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the RacingWire Podcast Network so you won't miss an episode. Also, subscribe to the Racing Network on YouTube. It'd be great if you leave a comment, especially a good one. You can follow us on social media. To find out who our next guest is on Twitter, it's RacingWire Info. There's a new episode of Inside Vintage Racing every week. I'm Brian Belansky. Have yourself a great week. Stay safe and go play with cars.